This was a neat idea. I don't think it worked out though. Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and this is the Onix Waltz XM10. It is a $900 Android-based digital audio player that is just 3 millimeters thicker than an iPhone. Look at that. And as someone who often complains about the thickness of digital audio players, especially the high-end ones, well, you can imagine I was pretty excited to check this one out. And a quick shout out to Shanling for sending this one in for review. If you want to check out the XM10, of course, I'm going to have them linked in the description down below. But with that said, we are going to go through this digital audio player, give it a review, and I'll give it a score. And we're going to start with the physical form factor and actually what comes inside the box, which is frankly kind of my first disappointment. So here's the packaging. The packaging is fine. I have no complaints about that. But what you get inside the box is pretty Spartan. You get a USB charging cable, USB-A on one end, USB-C on the other end, because this is like all modern DAPs. It is USB-C based, but then you also get a couple of plastic screen protectors. So they're just, you know, your basic plastic screen protectors, which frankly, I don't really like these because they reduce the feel of the glass screen. I prefer touching a glass screen. In fact, I think this one came with a screen protector pre-installed, so technically you get 3 of them. And if you scratch them, you can replace them, but I just took it off and I didn't put it back on because I prefer to touch the glass. Other than that, that's all you get inside the box. So I guess we're going to talk about the physical form factor and build quality on this digital audio player. And I will just say right up front, I think this thing looks freaking-tastic. It is a gorgeous digital audio player that is certainly built to feel every bit of its $900 price point. It is all stainless steel around the sides. Like, this is a stainless steel build. It's got this large 6-inch screen on the front of it. And I guess on the note of this screen, it is like a 2-to-1 aspect ratio, which is basically the same that you have on modern digital phones or smartphones. And the resolution is in fact like it's 1080p plus. In fact, if I punch in on that, you'll see the resolution, the crispness is super crisp. So pretty impressive there. Although there is a bit of a downside with this screen that you might have noticed by now. And if you haven't, well, I'm afraid to point it out to you, but it's that. There's a notch on this screen. And I think this is the first digital audio player I've ever used that has a notch. And why would they have a notch in there? Well, it's to give you a glowing logo for the brand, which feels like not a very good trade-off, if I'm honest. That is a light. You can turn that off if you want, but then you just have a black space that's your notch. So you have like no reason to have a notch. The whole reason that notches exist on smartphones is because they put like front-facing cameras on there. And I'm not saying I want a front-facing camera on my digital audio player, but I am saying I would prefer not to have a notch in it. The downside for me really is just that I use this app called Battery Overlay Bar. You see this white line going across the top that just lets me easily see my battery life no matter where I'm at in my audio player experience. And with this notch, it actually cuts it off unless I move it down, in which case now it's just kind of making the whole top of the audio player feel a little bit busy. So I'm not a big fan of that. But I guess back to the physical form factor, it is surprisingly thin. I kind of already talked about that in the intro, but man, this thing is really quite cool to behold because of how thin it is. It is all glass in the back as well, so all premium materials. And I also like, this is kind of a subtle thing, but I like that it's actually rounded down here at the bottom. That just means that when I'm holding this thing in my hand and I've got this kind of up against the bottom of my palm, it's not sharp, it's not uncomfortable. It's just nice thing to hold in the hand, apart from the fact that, holy crap, this thing is heavy AF. You might have caught that I mentioned this thing is made out of stainless steel. And FYI, stainless steel is a lot heavier than aluminum, which most other things are made out of. I think iPhones might be made out of stainless steel, like the iPhone Pros and stuff like that. Although maybe they've moved on to titanium now because they realize stainless steel is pretty stinking heavy, and it is pretty heavy here in this case. In fact, it's so heavy, I find it to be kind of cumbersome. So even though it does have this nice svelte, thin, and hand-holdable design, unfortunately, I think the weight kind of undermines all of that, in my opinion. Okay, let's do a quick tour of the buttons, which is kind of another disappointment I have. So, and maybe this is just me because I'm used to other digital audio players that have different button layouts, but so over here on the right side of the player, this button layout very similarly mimics what you would see in a modern iPhone, or, well, actually not an iPhone, but most other Android-based phones. So you've got your power button, right, your screen on off, and then directly below that you've got your volume up and down. And then over here on the left side is where you've got your play pause and your track skip previous, track skip next. For me, this just every time I've used this and like not thought about it, I've pressed the wrong button. And again, maybe this is just me because I'm used to other digital audio players, but I'm used to having like the play pause button and the track skipping over here on the right side, not over here on the left side. So I have like literally every time I've tried using this thing without thinking about it, without looking at it, I have hit the wrong button, which has been kind of frustrating. But again, maybe that's just a me problem. One thing that is not just a me thing, well, I mean, it might just be my preference. Maybe no one else cares. But the buttons are super, super clicky. In fact, let me see if I can get the sound on camera. I don't know. I think my, oh, I see it. I think you're getting that. The buttons are just like super, super clicky. And frankly, it actually makes the device feel a little bit cheaper than obviously it is. Like the build quality on this thing feels phenomenal. It feels every bit of its $900 price point, but except for those clicks. Those clicks just feel kind of cheap. Like you're directly activating a micro switch without any sort of dampening. Like a lot of times they'll put, you know, like a silicone membrane or something under the button just to give it this nice, softer, less clicky, less echoey feel. But unfortunately here with the XM10, you get all that echo. So not a big fan of that. Okay. And then I guess actually one other small complaint about the buttons, and this is a thing that I've noticed on some other audio players as well. I don't know if this is like a new trend, like why people are doing this, but let's see. If I press and hold the volume, right, you can see that the volume ramps up. And let's just stop it at 50, all right? So we remember we're at 50. However, if I turn the screen off and then press and hold the volume, I'm pressing and holding it for, you know, a good 10 seconds here. You would expect that the volume should be kind of maxed out at this point. But if I go back here and I press up, I'm still at 50. It doesn't change volume if you press and hold the button. And that might be like some intentional, like rejecting an accidental press, so you can't like accidentally ramp up the volume massively while you're listening to it and this thing's sitting in your pocket. But unfortunately, I just find it to be kind of cumbersome. So it means that when I have this thing with the screen turned off, if I want to ramp up the volume, I have to click it multiple times, which means clicking that overly loud button. And so that is just something I don't really like about this player as well. All right, let's get to the rest of the physical form factor on this thing. So nothing going on at the top. I already showed you the left side. You've got your buttons. So then down here is where you've got the rest of the I/O. You've got your micro SD card slot, which is as expected. Love to see that. You've got a USB-C port right there for charging. And then here, of course, you've got your headphone port. Actually, hold on. Where did I put it? BRB. I kind of lied to you earlier. There's another part of this that I didn't show you that comes inside the box, and it's going to come into play right now, which is this thing only has a 3.5 millimeter port on the bottom of it. If you want to use balanced, you've got to use this dongle. So it comes with a dongle, and you can see that unlike most 3.5 millimeter connectors, this thing has 5 poles on it. So you plug that into there, and then you have your 4.4 millimeter connector here on a dongle. And this does give you full balanced output. In fact, you get more power out of it because that is typically what you get with a balanced connector. So it is like a full normal balanced connection. It's not just a 3.5 millimeter step down adapter. This is like actually giving you a balanced connection. But nonetheless, I don't like this. I think this is a kind of bad solution. You know, Shanling did a similar thing with, I think it was the M0, the last M0 that they released. And on that device, it made a lot of sense because that is a device that is like literally this small, okay? They don't have a lot of space for 3.5 and a 4.4, so they give you this solution, and it's kind of clever. Still probably a little bit annoying if you're a 4.4 person. But here on a full-size digital audio player, look, this thing is not, it's thin, but it's not so thin that you couldn't have a 4.4 on there. So personally, I find this to be quite an inconvenient solution. Now, you might know I'm not a big 4.4. I don't use balanced a lot, but I do still nonetheless like my digital audio players to have balanced connections because sometimes you run into an IM or a headphone that uses balanced and you want to be able to have something to plug it into. And unfortunately, I actually ran into this issue just this last weekend when I went to a local audio show here in the Bay Area, and I thought it'd be clever, and I would bring the XM10 as my audio source, but I forgot the dongle, and there were a number of things that were there at the show that only had balanced connectors, and I couldn't listen to them on the audio player. So yeah, its inconvenience is not just hypothetical, its inconvenience is real, and I'm not a big fan of this as a solution. Okay. Oh, I guess one other note on this. Some of the other audio players, like Hibby's doing a pretty good job of this right now, where their different audio jacks have their own memory of which volume you last set it at, right? So if you're using one headphone on your balance connector and an IEM on your 3.5 mil, and you set your volume on your IEM to one setting and then your headphone to the other, the different jacks will remember what your volume setting is, and I think that's a nice convenient touch. Unfortunately, here with the XM10, I didn't get that, and I don't know if it's because they're sharing a port or if it's just not a feature that Shanling slash Onix have implemented. I'm not totally sure, but there you go. All right, anyway. I think that's about as much moaning as I have about the physical form factor. So we get to talking about the software experience here on the XM10, and it is, like I mentioned, it's an Android-based audio player. Let me swipe this thing up and just kind of show that this is rocking Android 13, which is pretty cool. It's using the standard Snapdragon 665 processor, which is the same processor you see on basically every modern Android-based audio player, including this one right here, which you can pick up for like 160 bucks. Which is a decent processor. Like, I will say that it is fine for running things like Spotify. In fact, I don't have Spotify in memory, so let's just kind of like the Spotify launch test so you can see how quickly it launches and scrolls Spotify as a general heuristic for like how quick and snappy this will be with other applications. So it does, you know, it chunks a little bit, but this is kind of to be expected for this processor. It does have a little bit more RAM than your average digital audio player. I think it's got 6 gigabytes, which is actually, okay, that's not just a little bit more. Most audio players are like 1 to 3 gigabytes of RAM. So 6 gigabytes of RAM is a lot, but I'm not really doing anything with my audio players where that RAM comes into play. And I would say that this like scroll performance feels exactly the same as it does, if not even a little bit worse than it does on the Hibby M300. Was there something else I was going to talk about with this? Oh, I mean, so this is chunking a little bit as I scroll it, but I did want to show you, if you're using another app, like let's say Power Amp, right? This is my favorite music app. This is not connecting to the internet and downloading it. Like Spotify is kind of a slow program, right? So if you're using a normal app, the performance is actually fantastic, right? But that's also been true for much slower processors. But yeah, generally this is, you know, good enough performance for an offline library. I don't think anyone's going to have any complaints. And then for a streaming service like Spotify, it can be a little bit chunky, but certainly serviceable. And then let me just highlight this. This is their own kind of stock Android player, which I think is just a fork of Shanling's, what do they call it? The Edict player, but don't quote me on that. I don't know that for a fact. I could just be making stuff up. Okay. All right, let's talk about the rest of this stuff. So it is Android, and unfortunately, there are some things about this Android execution that are limiting. Like it does have the Google Play Store. I'll show you. Right there you go. It's got the Google Play Store, and because it's Android 13, you're going to be able to find basically all of the apps that you could want to run, including Niagara Launcher, right? I like to customize my launcher with Niagara Launcher, but you might notice that I'm not using Niagara Launcher on this device, and that's because this software prevents me from keeping Niagara Launcher as my default launcher. It constantly will override my default launcher with their default launcher, and I find that pretty frustrating. It basically means I can't customize this DAP the way that I like to typically customize my Android-based apps, and for what reason, I'm not entirely sure. Basically, it feels like what they've done is they've completely replaced the Android gestures, right? So like if you've used Android before, there's usually like a little bar down here, which indicates you can swipe up, right? Or maybe when you are in an app and you swipe in from the left, you see a little arrow appear over here, right? So you have like these swipe gestures. They still have all of the same swipe gestures, but they've just like rewritten them and they've done them in a way that's a little bit clumsier. Like it doesn't have the affordances that help you kind of tell what's going on. So like to do this little swipe up gesture, like sometimes it just doesn't work as you expect. Sometimes the back gesture I get when I don't want. In fact, let me see is this what it, oh my God, I can't even remember how it did this. Yeah, so there's an example, right? So if you were using this normally with Android gestures and you did a swipe back, but you didn't release your finger and then like you like wanted to not do it, you could like return back to it. But it's already registering that gesture before I've released my finger. Just as like, I know that seems like a really small point, but just I'm using that as an example of how this execution is a little bit on the janky side. And I think that that's the reason why I can't use the custom launcher, is because they want this kind of janky solution, which I really don't understand. I don't get it. I'm not a big fan of that. Okay. Are there other things? Oh yeah, actually another thing that I often do with my Android-based audio players is I will use app pinning. So I'll show you what that looks like, because you can enable app pinning on this, which is basically just a way that it lets you pin a particular app to, like, it freezes that app so that you can't access anything else on the audio player. Because this is Android and I'm logged into it with like my Google account, realistically, if you got hold of this and stole it from me and I didn't have a password on it, you'd have access to my Gmail, which means you could probably reset my passwords on half the things I use. So I don't want that. So I want this thing to be nice and secure. So I use a password, but then it can be annoying to use a password every time you turn on your screen with your digital audio player, right? It's like, I don't want this thing to actually be a phone. So I use app pinning to get around that. And the way you do that is you tap up here, you see this option to pin an app. And I'm not going to tap it right now, because if I pin an app on this device, it breaks the software experience. Like, I can then like close the app, but then I'm just stuck and I can't do anything with the audio player until I completely reset the hardware. So basically app pinning is broken on this thing. I can't do a custom launcher the way I like to. And then, well, I guess I'll talk about this now. PowerAmp is my audio player of choice. I prefer this to most stock music apps. In fact, all stock music apps. But on this device, unfortunately, I didn't really like using it, because like every 20 or 30 minutes, I would get like this really audible blip in my audio, which I'm not used to getting. I didn't have that problem with Spotify, so I suspect it's something related to the way that PowerAmp is constantly upscaling, upsampling all of the music. Frankly, I wish PowerAmp didn't do this. Like, it's somewhat of a self-own on this in this regard. But nonetheless, like, it's a thing that other audio players don't have a problem with. And it meant that I wasn't using PowerAmp on this device, and instead was using this Onix app, which is not bad. I guess I'll give you a quick tour of this app. But I guess, no. Okay, yeah, we'll do the tour of this app, all right? Here's what I'll say about this. I actually think this look right here, this little home screen look, is pretty handsome. I like how simple it is, how it's just got like these gold, thick outline, consistent design with the icons. I dig that. And otherwise the performance or just the navigation of the app is more or less what you expect, right? You've got your list of artists, you go in, pulls up, I don't know why it pulls up the first three songs alphabetical. This is not that useful, but there it is. And then, of course, you've got your albums down here. You can dig into your albums, start playing an album, yada, yada, yada. The basic stuff. However, there's a couple of the basic things that this software gets wrong. Now, most digital audio player softwares get this stuff wrong, which is why I use PowerAmp. But nonetheless, I'm going to take the opportunity to harp on it. Here's a couple things that it does wrong, all right? The cure test. We go down to our C's, and the cure does not appear in the C's. In fact, I have to go down to the thes. All of the bands are alphabetized alongside of each other. Okay, so that's a little bit annoying. Maybe more importantly, hold on, where is the cure? The Marias, the Midnight, I don't even know where the cure is. Wait, why does it go to the Weekend, the Cardigans? This is the first time I noticed this. This is not even alphabetized. So now I'm even doubly annoyed by this. All right, so you go into the cure. Here's my other issue. I like to listen to one artist on repeat, but I want to hear their albums in order. And unfortunately, this software just doesn't let you do that. You can listen to one album at a time and loop it. And then you can do this view all songs and listen to all songs, but it then alphabetizes the songs, which is not the order that they are in on my albums. So I get kind of frustrated by that. Here's another thing too that I did notice that I can show you, is that it also, the fact that I just noticed that the thes are not correctly alphabetized suggests to me that this is probably related. But if I go into, here I'm on cigarettes after sex, I go into singles, this is Barry, this is Gal Dive, this is Ghostly Kisses, that's Droid Bishop, and that's cigarettes after sex. Why are all these other artists organized under cigarettes after sex? I don't know. There's some weird categorization bug going on here. I've rebuilt the library a couple of times. It didn't fix those issues. I don't know what's going on, but I'm kind of stuck using this app, and it's just frankly not a very good app. And frankly, that is pretty frustrating. I guess just to the next thing I will mention is that this app does have EQ built into it. So I'll show you. It is not a system-wide EQ, unfortunately, but that's fairly par for the course. But what it's not quite par for, well, it is about par for the course, but this is just like your basic 10-band EQ with, you got 10 sliders. But it's not parametric EQ, I guess is what I meant to say. And it's not system-wide. So it's a little bit underwhelming in that regard. Okay, anything else software experience-wise to talk about? I don't think so. That's the basic gist of it. It's just, I can't customize it the way I want. The softwares I want to use don't really work that well. And then the softwares that I need to use also don't really work that well, unfortunately. Now, as for the rest of the functionality, let's talk about battery life on this audio player. It has a 4,300 milliamp hour battery, which is kind of average for a digital audio player, but this thing has got such a big screen on it that you might expect, I would kind of expect it to have more of a phone-like battery size, which might be closer to like 5,000 milliamp hours. But nonetheless, it's 4,300 milliamps. Out of that, in terms of playtime, they quote about 9 hours of playtime, and that seems about right for me. Both on single-ended and balanced, although I didn't listen to this much on balanced because, well, you got to use this dongle. 9 hours of playback is actually pretty poor in terms of battery life. Some people don't have an issue with that amount of playtime, but the way that I like to use digital audio players is kind of as my main primary source throughout the day, as well as throughout the night. And this thing can like barely make it through a night. In fact, I think that, no, I'm thinking of the FiO JM21. That one died on me overnight. This one, I think it made it through the couple of nights that I slept with it, but I didn't use it to sleep with that much for two reasons. The battery life is not very good, but also this thing gets like stinking hot. It's not that bad if it's not under a bed sheet, but if you are, listening to this in bed, this thing will get stinking hot. Not a big fan of that as well. Okay, now let's talk about the sound here on the Onix XM10. They make a big deal about using these new AKM, it's like the AK4499EX DAC. I was going to spell out what DAC stands for, but whatever. And I think that is partly responsible for the battery life on this guy. I'm not into these DAC memes. Like, they all sound basically the same to me until you dig into kind of three main things, right? For me, it's like power output. How much power output are you getting? Noise floor. Are you getting a noise floor? And then third thing is like, is there high output impedance on this, right? And this device thankfully does not have high output impedance. The Shanling does a good job of quoting, or Onix does a good job of quoting the output impedance measures on these things, which is, I believe, 0.6 ohms of impedance on the single-ended, and then 1 ohm of impedance on the balanced connector, which is, pretty typical. That's good. That just means that if you connect your headphone or your IM, you're not likely to accidentally shift the tonal balance of it. So I appreciate that. In terms of power output is actually pretty decent on this. It's not like fantastic, but on single-ended, you're getting 227 milliwatts of output, and on balanced, you're getting almost 900 milliwatts, which is actually a lot, and that's at 32 ohms. So that much is impressive. However, the downside is that the noise floor in this thing is actually higher than anything that I've heard in a long time. It's not to the point that it's going to be a problem for most people, all right? When I'm doing this test, I'm looking around to see if I have it within arm's reach. I don't. When I do this test, I listen to a track that is playing silence, and I use my most sensitive IM. So I'm like trying to hear hiss. And on this one, I heard it right away. Like, a lot of times it's like kind of hard to hear, especially on 3.5 mil. But this one, I kind of heard it right away. It was very obvious that it was there. And then when I switch over to the balance connector, it was even louder, which is typical when I do hear hiss. It's just kind of it's unfortunate to hear it in a digital audio player in 2025, as well as especially a digital audio player that costs $900. The good side is that, again, the power ratings are plenty high. I had no issues driving. Well, I didn't try my Sennheiser HD600s. Instead, I tried the Headphone 2 GT, which is even harder to drive, and on 3.5 millimeter, so not even balanced, and even on low gain, this thing can get those things plenty loud enough. So 900 milliwatts of power, while it sounds impressive, if that is related at all to the poor battery life and the noise floor, feels like a trade-off that for me is not worth it, but maybe for you it might be. But with that said, I think that is about as much as I can say about this digital audio player. So we're going to go into our conclusion. Normally at this time I would bring in some other DAPs for comparison or something like that, but frankly, I don't really like this player, unfortunately. I really wanted to, but I'm going to give it 2 stars out of 5. I wanted to love a nice, thin, phone-like digital audio player that looks freaking beautiful, and it does look beautiful. But unfortunately, it's heavy. The buttons are kind of annoying. The software experience is frankly bad, and then the sound is like, it's fine most of the time, so like I don't want to say this thing sounds bad, but versus something like this little $160 player, like this one I think sounds better because it doesn't have the noise floor issues. So yeah, out of 5 stars, it's just 2 for me. If you want to check it out still, of course, I will have it linked in the description down below. And while you're down there, if you haven't already, please do hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, join me on Discord, also linked down below, and I'll catch you on the next super review. Cheers.
This review is super, yeah, yeah, yeah. This review is super, yeah, yeah, Join with the force of reviews, we now have the tools to brave the misleading world of audio fools. Hey, this review is super, and so are you. Grab your headphones, sniff a graph, and share your thoughts in this pursuit. Let's get into the pitch.